I scripted this episode shortly before Mother's Day on May 11th to pay my respects to my maternal female lineage. If you are an empath, some parts might be hard to hear, as it isn't easy for me to share. If you are a woman, a mother, it'll probably resonate with you more, even though I shouldn't be saying that, as there are kind and compassionate men among my closest friends who love and respect their mothers, wives, female partners, and colleagues, and who try to understand them and themselves through them. So, regardless of your gender, thank you for listening. This is the podcast Il Zebra's Transformations. I am the Il Zebra. The main purpose of this podcast is to continue journaling so that I keep healing. This is not a diary, meaning that my records won't necessarily reflect events in their chronological order, nor do I promise that the details will be accurate. If listening to my processing of traumas helps someone else along the way, I'll take it as having accomplished something for the higher good of all concerned. But now, without further ado, let's start. It's May 9th, 2025. A military parade to mark Victory Day is being held at Moscow's Red Square to mark 18 years since the end of World War II. Chinese President Xi Jinping traveled to Russia earlier in the week to attend the celebrations and to meet his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for talks aimed at bolstering what the nations describe as no-limits partnership. I watch a fragment of a YouTube video on the South China Morning Post and feel my heart racing. I turn on Facebook and see one of my Facebook friends shares an illustration by German artist Herbert Smagen named 1945. It depicts a naked woman. Russian soldiers hold her legs apart. She's bleeding. One soldier has a gun in her mouth. Another one is pulling his pants on. There's an empty vodka bottle nearby. The description goes, Russian army raped hundreds of thousands of women aged 8 to 80 in Germany after the war. Children who tried to prevent the rape of their mothers were shot. Mothers who tried to defend their daughters were shot. These atrocities were carried out methodically, in groups and without distinction of ranks. History repeats itself, and the war grandfathers have raised the war grandsons, who have now invaded Ukraine, Irpin, Bucha, Mariupol. History repeats. This black crowd has not changed for centuries, and their bloody deeds continue. Savages will always sit in the mud and think that they have a heavenly life. They have enough of what today's civilized world would not accept. And when the desire to rob and murder arises, then they go to their neighbors. This tumor will grow until it's cut out. A comment from Christine. Here's a testimony from an eyewitness. When the Russian army came, they took everything: food, peace, dignity. Houses were demolished and people were violated. When the German army came, they asked if they could wash their laundry and clean themselves up. They gave children chocolates and caramels. The soldiers who had been on the front line were particularly kind. Two very different armies. Two very different worlds. In Latvia, the government always organizes preventive measures to avoid conflict escalation between the Latvian and Russian populations as the Victory Day approaches. There is still disagreement over whether Russia liberated Latvia or occupied it and imposed its power. I want conflicts to end, but I know some things can't be forgiven. I turn inward and seek memories. In 2018, I created a Facebook group called What's Your Latvian Story? English is the main language of communication in this group because most group members don't know Latvian, even though they have Latvian ancestors or parents. That determined the type of stories that have been shared. Most of them are about fleeing Latvia during or shortly after World War II. My intent wasn't necessarily to focus on that topic. I welcome any kind of Latvian story, or even one that is not Latvian per se, but is triggered by observing what is shared in the group. However, today I will share my post-World War II Latvian story. Liepāja is a beach town situated on the shore of the Baltic Sea in the western part of Latvia, called Kurland. It's about an hour's drive north from the Lithuanian beach town Palanga. I was born in Valmiera, which is situated on the other side of the country, at a 15-minute distance from the Estonian town of Valga. It's the end of June 2018, and I visit my parents who still live in Valmiera. They are still in relatively good health, and we go on road trips. First, we travel to places that are closer, but then I initiate a road trip to Liepāja. They say yes. We decide to leave on July 4th, the American Independence Day. Getting to Liepāja means we have to cross the entire country. Latvia is small, so we'll be there by the end of the day, even with the stops that we plan to take. In the car, we share sandwiches and conversations. Our route goes through the territory that has different names: the Kurland Cauldron, the Kurland Fortress, and the Kurland Bridgehead. The German historian Franz Kurowski calls it the Cauldron of Death in Kurland, which is also the title of his book. He has collected information on the battles in Kurland at the end of World War II. The intensity of the battles, the determination of both sides, and the tragedies of the soldiers made the battles in Kurland one of the most vivid pages of the end of World War II. On both sides of the road I see vast plains of poppy fields, and my mother shares a legend that makes me want to stop. She says that these poppies are unlike any poppies elsewhere in Latvia because in the middle of each flower there's a black cross. Liepāja is light and airy. It's because it's situated on a seashore, so it's almost always windy there. We don't mind the wind as we walk through the town, tracing the sculptures of the anthem of the wind town. We act like excited children when we spot another sculpture and pose for pictures. They will be a part of my treasure chest. We schedule a group tour at the Naval Port Prison Museum. While we are waiting, we visit grandiose Naval Orthodox Cathedral of St. Nicholas. It's a Russian church, but since there's nothing else to do in the vicinity, we go check it out. They accept tourists. Before we can enter the nave, though, women, that is my mother and I, we have to wrap our heads and bodies in kerchiefs since we are wearing shorts. The Russian Orthodox Church doesn't tolerate women wearing pants. We think we look comical, so we giggle and take selfies, which will be forbidden inside. These photos, too, constitute another addition to my treasure chest. The prison tour is scheduled for 2 p.m. At the beginning, the acting of a guide feels like a joke, but soon I realize it's not. The tourist guide is imitating the gaslighting that Latvians were subjected to under the Soviets, so we can experience it on our own skin. At times, he shifts from the character he plays to a more conventional tourist guide. Then we hear stories about how closely people were packed in 3 by 3 meter cells to prevent them from freezing to death in winter, as there was no heating. With such density, they could only stand, and there were no chairs or beds to sit on anyway. There was only one wooden tray to place on the concrete floor. They took turns to sleep on it. If anyone complained about freezing at the time, they were given a piece of a cast iron radiator and forced to do squats holding it to warm up. A toilet break was granted twice a day at certain times, not when there was a need. At some point during the tour, I get locked up in the toilet room for asking too many questions. The room is pitch black as it has no windows. There's a hole and a huge ladle. Prisoners who were locked up there for disobedience were made to use that ladle to scoop the feces and throw it down the hole. I watch my mother's face, and I know. She thinks of her mom. That's when I know Liepa is not only light and airy, it's heavy too. My memory of my grandmother Elsa is fragmented. I don't remember sitting in her lap, something that a child would remember of a grandmother. Maybe my memory is bad. We spent many summers at her house, but looking back I can recall much less than I wish. I do remember her voice and singing. I loved her singing, and I always asked for more. Sometimes she listened. Sometimes she said, I'd have to wait till the next time. I learned a lot of folk songs from her. She loved knitting and crocheting. A good section of her library was devoted to craft magazines. Her library was substantial. I loved her books. She was the first to teach me sewing too. Her crafts and her garden were beautiful. I also remember how we once went on a road trip to see a famous Latvian writers' museum. I thought she was much kinder to her students as a teacher than most of my teachers were. Elsa had a good husband too, but he wasn't always around. Her husband bought us dolls, something our parents never did. Previously, we got our dolls from someone who had grown up. My grandma's husband could afford to buy new toys. He built big bridges. That's why he often disappeared for a week or more. When he returned, he gave all his money to my grandma and she hid it in the linen closet under the pile of crocheted pillowcases. Once, he bought us a toy gun, a suction dart pistol, because we asked him to. My grandma got mad and made us to put it away. Then, my sister and I didn't like her. We also didn't like her on those days when she didn't seem to want us around. She made us be quiet when we were singing. We always left then and played in the yard or on the road all day long unattended. I later learned from my mom that my grandma Elsa suffered from excruciating migraines. My grandma's husband wasn't our grandfather, but if he were, he would be the kindest, the most loving, and the most fun grandpa. He was a brilliant storyteller, which is why I loved to accompany him when he went fishing. I didn't care about fishing much, but I wanted to hear his stories. One was about how the entire brass band fell into the river from the suspension bridge. That bridge was fun. I liked to jump on it to make it swing. I miss my faux grandpa. My grandma didn't share stories. As an adult with 2 children, I wrote her once when I knew she wouldn't be around forever. I wanted her to talk with me about my ancestors. She wrote me back and said it would have to be postponed. I feel weak these days. Even writing feels challenging. Let's wait until I feel better, dear daughter, she said. She called me Daughter Ilzite. That was her last letter to me. I heard Elsa's story from my mother. I'm trying to piece it together and make sense of what could have happened. I lack details. In November 1946, a Russian militiaman was shot dead in the territory that used to be the family property before the Soviet system took it away through the process of naturalization. Emma and her daughter Elsa were the only inhabitants of the house. Emma's husband was only 28 when he passed. Emma had raised her 2 children alone until Russians forcefully took her 15-year-old son from the hayfield straight to the front line. Elsa was her only child left then, so they didn't try to flee Latvia like other Latvian homeowners did. Emma was hoping for her son's return. Soviet officials came to investigate the crime. They searched the house but didn't find the weapon. Neighbors had often seen 3 people in the yard. It looked like Elsa had a female friend. No tenant was found. My mother says the wedding was scheduled on Christmas. I don't know if it's true or it's something she wanted to believe in. I know they arrested Elsa in the first trimester of her pregnancy. My mother says Elsa's friend was not a woman. It was my grandfather disguised as a female to avoid being drafted. Elsa was kept captive from the beginning of November through the end of February until the baby was born prematurely. The baby was tiny. She weighed only 1 kilo and 600 grams. So she was named Marita, which means Ladybug. Marita was my mother. After the childbirth, Elsa was released. They wouldn't have survived if they were kept in. The baby's father, my biological grandfather Otto, had disappeared. I've seen some photos of him in my grandma's house. I ask how that was possible. I'm told he had entered her house while she was at work. They used to not lock the doors. He took photos of his reflection in her mirror and left his camera on the shelf. I don't know if Otto shot the Russian militiaman. Probably not. His form of protest was art. History books recognize him as a Soviet dissident. I don't know if anyone was actually arrested or executed for the killing. Eventually, Otto ended up in a Gulag labor camp in the Komi Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic for his anti-Soviet agitation. Yet it happened years later, in 1952. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison but was pardoned and released after 3 years since he had submitted a letter of remorse. I am being told Elsa didn't want to hear Otto's name mentioned in her presence. He died young at the age of 51 after an interrogation at the corner house, which is how the KGB headquarters was called. He continued protesting through his art and held secret meetings in his Riga apartment. Elsa got married, and her husband was the best grandpa to me I could ever imagine. Otto got married too, but this story is dedicated to my maternal female lineage. My ancestors left me with an inheritance, for sure. The ancestral trauma to resolve and heal. I'll talk about my sorting through it in the future stories. Today, though, on Mother's Day Eve, I want to acknowledge the survival instinct and resilience that I also have inherited. Yet the message of this episode is much broader. It's about our ancestral history, old and ongoing conflicts. Recently, I posted an encouragement to share stories on the Facebook group What's Your Latvian Story? And a lady commented saying, "Dear Ilze, I don't feel comfortable writing about my family's history because of the war with Russia. Some of my dear relatives live there." I agree that the matter is delicate, but I still believe we must share while we live, to honor our ancestors and to heal our wounds. If there's anyone who listens and wants to share but doesn't know how to approach a delicate matter, feel free to email me for more information at ilze@ilzeb.com. You can also click on the description of this podcast to see that contact information. I'd love to hear from you. I can usually get back to you pretty quickly, within a day or two. I offer lots of different choices for different purposes and budgets. Something I'll highlight here before I conclude is that I have noticed that when people journal and share their truths, emotionally painful matters tend to lose their negative charge. When I journal or script for this podcast, I get a chance to observe my words more attentively, and I obtain peace with what is. I encourage everyone who listens to try it. You'll see how you'll gradually move from what initially seems scary, uncomfortable, and even destructive truth toward healing and mending. I do have a story about how my attitude towards Russia or someone being ethnic Russian has changed, but I'll reserve it for another time. But be sure I'll share it because my ultimate goal is to see currently conflicting sides come to peace. So if you feel the same way, let's start with healing ourselves. I believe in the power of healing through speaking. Wise people say, when we heal, the world around us heals. You've been listening to the podcast of Ilze B. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and share it to show me your support and help me grow. If you want to learn more about me, my causes, my products, and my services, please visit my website ilzebe.com. That's ILZEBE.com. Disclaimers. In this podcast, I talk about mental and physical health and what has helped me to heal. Nothing that I say should be regarded as medical advice. If you have any medical condition, consult your doctor. Also, I'm an artist and storyteller. I'm sharing my stories because that's what artistic people do. Take it as fiction and as a form of my art. Even though I may sound as if I'm recalling events from my past, I don't confirm they actually happened. And if they did, I'm not blaming or accusing anyone, nor should you. I take all my life lessons with gratitude, trusting that they are given to me to expand my soul.